This video will deal with the basics of full bleed printing and setting up crop marks in Adobe Illustrator. For this example, let's say that you wanted to make a printed postcard type flyer, just one-sided, that measured 7 inches wide by 9 inches tall. Here's what it would look like against a black background, let's say. Now, if you made your file, brought it to the printer, and made it exactly 7 by 9, there's a very high probability that you would have a problem. The problem is, when they print this stuff, they don't print it on 7 by 9 paper. Almost everything that you print gets printed on larger paper and then trimmed down. So imagine, if you will, that this is being printed on 30 by 40 inch paper, for example. So they're printing a whole bunch of them, and then they try to trim it to the exact size. Did you imagine something like this in your head, where all of a sudden one or more strips of white come screaming through, ruins the whole design? So when we have a print job like this that goes to at least one edge of the paper, that is known as a bleed. When it goes to all edges, that's typically when you would call it a full bleed design, meaning that you have ink coverage that goes to every corner of the page. Now, the key concept to understand here is that when you have ink that goes to the edge of the page, it must go beyond the edge. It must bleed into the rest of the paper that's there. So first, let's talk about how you would set that up in Adobe Illustrator. Okay, so in Adobe Illustrator, depending on where you open up, you might see a menu like this, or you could click Create New. You can also come up to the top menu and go File, New. And I'm just doing File, New so that we're all in the same place, so that we get this new document thing. So what you want to do is probably by default, might look something like this. So you want to dial in your exact width, which we said was 7 inches, your exact height, which is 9 inches. Now, this first part of the demo that I'm going to show you would be, what if this was a real job, this was the real size 7 by 9, how would you set up the document? Then we'll go into how would you fake the document, like if you had a client coming to your office. But first, let's concentrate on the real thing here. So we set it to the exact size that the document would be trimmed to, 7 by 9, and then we need to set up a bleed. The industry standard is 1/8 of an inch. Now, if you don't know what 1/8 of an inch is, in as far as what you would enter in the decimal equivalent, then there's a couple different things you can do. One is you can do math right inside of most of these Adobe things, just like you would do a calculator. So like a calculator on a computer, you go 1/8 and then hit the tab key, and then you will see, especially if you're in inches, you will see the equivalency in inches. If you're not seeing inches, then what you have to do is click here on More Settings and then change the units here to inches. Okay, the other thing that you can do is, if this is zeroed out, and when you're in inches, is just up click this one time, and as long as you remember 1.2 or 0.125 is 1/8 of an inch, you remember it. And the reason it's one click away is because it's the industry standard. Now, sometimes if you're doing something huge, it'll have 1/4 of an inch, but you just find that out from your printer. This is the norm. Okay, so and I'm going to just reduce this down to just one artboard, just to keep things simple at first. Then we're going to click Create, and then what you'll see here is the white here is our actual size, 7 by 9, and then we have 1/8 of an inch extra all the way around. So let's recreate that design and see if you can tell me right off the bat. I'm going to purposely make a mistake here because I want you to see if you can figure out what it is. So I took and made the stroke color, brought that forward, hit none, bring the swatch color forward, and then I'm just going to pick yellowish color, and then I need this to be 7 by 9. With Smart Guides turned on, you can see right when I get into the corner there, it tells me 7 by 9. If Smart Guides aren't on, you just go up to the View menu and turn them on. So what was my mistake? My mistake is this yellowish green color is supposed to go all the way to every edge, so it needs to go beyond. And how far beyond? Our standard is 1/8 of an inch, so we're going to make that so that it goes right to the red line there, which means it is now 1/8 of an inch over. Now this would also apply if it was a photograph. So if someone told you you were making a postcard that was 7 by 9 and you're cropping your image, instead of cropping it to 7 by 9, you're going to have to crop it to 7 1/4 by 9 1/4, because 7 plus 1/8 plus 1/8 is 7 1/4. Then we are going to do the same thing for our other element. I'll grab the rectangle tool again and we'll pick a reddish color for those. Whoops, and I'm going to Command Z that because I still had this selected, so I need to click away from that first. Then select my red color. Now go back, grab my rectangle tool, and I just have the red here and no stroke. And I'll just go ahead and create a little design so anything that goes to the edge goes beyond the edge to the bleed. Just like that, just like that. Now, if you were done with your design and it was all set, ready to go to the printer, this is exactly what you would send the printer. The printer would get this. They would know that this is the edge of your document. They would know that this is a bleed. They would print it. Well, before they printed it, they would set it up in their machine to get as many as they could out of one piece of paper, and then they would put crop marks on it so they knew where to cut it. So if that was it, you would be done now. But now let's imagine you've got a client come into your office and they want to see the design that you made for them. And we'll stick with this exact example. So let's say you want to print this out, you want to trim it nice and clean for the client to see. What are you going to do? Chances are, if you go File, Print, and print this right now, it's only going to print what is right inside of the document window, which means you would not get the bleed. Now, if you tried to trim that with an X-Acto knife and you were really good, you could probably do okay, but it's a lot more work than it is if you just bleed it like a commercial printer would do and put crop marks on it. So let's talk about how you do that. So in short, what we need to do is make another artboard that's the size of the paper that we're going to print on. Luckily this is small, we can print it on 8.5 by 11. If it was larger, let's say it was 8.5 by 11, then we'd have to go up to the next size paper, which would probably be 11 by 17 or 12 by 18 or 13 by 19. But instead of just making an artboard and then copying this work on and then putting crop marks on it, I'm going to show you a super easy way to work here. It's much faster. So what I'm going to do here, and if any of your stuff looks different than mine, just make sure you go to Essentials over here and then just make sure it is set to Essentials. If anything is all messed up out here like this, you just come down here and you say Reset Essentials. Okay, so what we are going to do is first make our crop marks. To make a crop mark, it is as simple as making a rectangle and then going up to the menu, selecting Effects and Crop Marks. That's it. Any rectangle can be made into crop marks. The key thing that you have to remember is that you don't want any of that rectangle to show. So I'm purposely going to make my rectangle out of a color that will really stick out like a sore thumb if it's left in there. And you should probably do the same. So I just have a fill on it, no stroke, and I'm going to go right over the top here. Okay, and then I can see in that little box down there that the width is 7, the height is 9. That's extremely important because the biggest rookie mistake on this is that you make a box that's or a rectangle that's the entire size. You know, in other words, you go and you start clicking up here rather than here, and then in that case you'd end up with a box that's 7 1/4 by 9 by 1/4. This is perfect. Now you go up to Effect with this still selected. If it's not selected, you have to select it. with this direct selection tool or the selection tool. Then you go to Effect, Crop Marks, release the mouse, and you now have your crop marks there. I'm going to zoom in here so you can see our crop marks, and you can see that they're doing exactly like they should. They're about 1/4 of an inch away from the actual work, so that when you print this out and lay your ruler down, you can cut from here to the other crop mark on the other side, still keep your paper intact so that this crop mark doesn't fall away from you. And you kind of actually really have to make a mistake once to appreciate what I'm saying. But if you do exactly what I say, you won't make that mistake. Very important to us at this point is that we don't leave any ink on here. Sometimes it's not so obvious. If you have a fill color, a green like I did, it's obvious. But what if you had it set to just a stroke? Now it's not so obvious, right? Can you see that green stroke? No, because it's right on top of the bounding box of our artboard. So you gotta be careful there. So you would select that box that you made for your crops, and this time you're gonna make sure that none is selected for both the stroke and the fill, which doesn't hide the crops, it keeps them there. Now that we've done that, we can go ahead and create our artboard that is the exact size that we want to print on. But even one step earlier easier would be to make a copy of this artboard and then change its size. So what I'm going to do is grab the Artboard tool, which is this one right here, click on it to select it. You can tell things change a little bit to let you know you're in artboard mode. And now I'm going to click and drag, but also hold down the Option key here. So I'm clicking, I'm dragging, I press the Option key, I release the mouse, I release the Option key. Now I have an exact copy, and I moved it a good distance away. If you don't think you moved it far enough away, just go ahead and click and drag. This time don't hold down the Option key and you can just move it away. Because we're going to add to this artboard so that we can see our crop marks when it prints out on, in this example, the 11 by 8.5 paper. So because we're in artboard mode and we go over here into properties when it's set to essentials, we will see the width and the height of the artboard. We are going to make sure that this transform dot is right in the middle. See the difference there? First time it was up top left corner. This is bottom right corner. Right in the center is what we're looking for. And we're going to change this width to 8.5. And as soon as I tab away from that, what you'll see is it adds a little bit here and a little bit here, thus it being in the middle. Voila. And then the height, we want that to be 11. Tab. Perfect. Now, what we see is we see our crop marks there. They are going to print over, in this case, about a 90% chance, depending on your printer, they would have been cut off. Here, all we're going to do is set our ruler so that the ruler is on the good part of the work. So imagine well, here, let me make a rectangle. Let's take the rectangle tool and let's make it kind of a grayish color so it looks kind of like a ruler, grayish pinkish. So you'll align that with the crop mark here. All right, so pretend that's your ruler. You're going to take your X-Acto knife, pretend the X-Acto knife is my cursor, and I'm going to start it just outside the work, come all the way down and stop just outside the work, or just outside the ink of the entire work. I don't want to start at the top and cut all the way down, because then this crop mark and this crop mark end in the trash, and I'm going to need them later. So now I'm just going to move the ruler over here, and I'm going to cut from just outside the ink to just outside the ink. Then I'm going to take my ruler, turn it, I'm going to align it here, and now I'm going to cut from just outside the ink to just outside the ink, and we are going to be good.